Hey everyone, welcome to the CyberHub Engage podcast, back in our natural habitat of the studio after an intensive on the road, right, Micah? We were on the road for a little bit, and back in the studio. The road to CyberHub Summit leads through our studio this time, and we are in the studio with my very good friend Jason Lawrence, and we have an unbelievable podcast coming to you guys. We're going to go a layer deeper on today's podcast. So if you're a returning listener, you're used to us really talking very holistic, very surface. Today, we're going to go a level deeper into cybersecurity operations, incident response, forensics, and security operations centers. Very, very good podcast with someone who has been doing this for a very, very, very long time. Right, Jason?
Roughly 25 years.
Roughly. He's going to tell you guys all about it. All right, guys. So before we kind of get going on today's episode, I want to talk to you about privacy and security, obviously, right? But how many of you guys do what I do? Travel a lot, go work out of coffee shops. You need to get out of it. You need to kind of go brainstorm. You know, you go to your favorite Starbucks, or in my case, my favorite coffee shop here in Atlanta. You sit down, you put in your AirPods, you're listening to your favorite CyberHub Engage or Goodbye Privacy podcast or Journey if you want to listen to music, and you're having a good time. You're up and away working, going over apps, documents, coding, whatever it is that you do for work, analyzing logs, whatever it is, reading a really important email from your boss, and then all of a sudden you see that person kind of staring at your screen, and you go, dude, don't look at my screen. Can't I have some privacy? Well, up until right now, the answer to that would have been I got to sit in the corner of the coffee shop or the side of the coffee shop to get that. Not anymore. With Get Smart Eye, you don't have to do that anymore. Get Smart Eye is a very cool app that you can use on your phone. It reads your biometrics, so it reads your face. This is how it works. It's looking at your face. So while you're reading a document, it's making sure you're the only person looking at it. Try to put another phone in front of it, take a picture of the document, screen goes black. Someone gets behind you, tries to look at your screen, like that nosy person at Starbucks or wherever, screen goes black. No one can see what you're seeing on your device when you're using Get Smart Eye. So support our friends, and my very good friend Dexter, who is not a security guy, who came up with this product on a trip overseas dealing with security guys and went, how come I can see everything you guys see? Isn't that like the complete opposite of security? And he's absolutely right. He's launched this amazing product. So go to getsmarteye.com/James, getsmarteye.com/James, getsmarteye.com/James for a link to download the app and the opportunity to see a free demo of it. This is great for a person, a small business, an enterprise business. If you travel a lot, this is the right app for you. So again, go to getsmarteye.com/James to get access to the app I don't leave home without. And so we're back. Jason, welcome to the studio.
Thanks for having me, James. How are you doing today?
Man, I just flew in, like I told you. We're talking about this off. I woke up pretty early, so I'm okay. And coming in from the Midwest, it's a nice, little short flight. That's the advantage of Atlanta, because we were talking about Atlanta a minute ago. Advantage, you're like a 2-hour flight from anywhere, almost.
Best airport in the country.
No, if it's the best airport in the country, it's convenient.
Has flights to anywhere that you may want to go, and lots of places that you probably don't want to go.
You mean like Kalispell, Montana? Or Montgomery, Alabama?
You drive to Montgomery, Alabama from
There's
here.
people that fly, though.
There are.
I don't get it, but, there's people that fly from Atlanta to Valdosta.
Valdosta's in Georgia.
Yeah.
Valdosta.
I'm sorry. Did that offend you there, George and Micah?
I don't get offended.
You don't get offended. Yes, I'm doing well. How about yourself?
Doing great. This week I'm on PTO, so I'm taking some time for myself, hanging out with friends, hanging out with the family.
Refreshing.
Refreshing, yes. Getting ready
for the fourth quarter.
Fourth quarter, getting ready for some very interesting engagements, working with some very interesting customers, helping them get their security operations on the right track.
Security operations. So before we kind of get into the layer deeper aspect of it, why don't you share with our listeners, give them a little bit of your background, because you've been doing this for 25 years. I've had a lot of, I like to call cybersecurity practitioners and veterans on the show, people that have been in security for 20, 25 years, but share with us a little bit about your background in security.
Well, I started my career back in Israel, working for the largest healthcare company there, where I helped
Maccabi or Clalit?
Clalit, where I helped them build out their Windows or Microsoft environment and secure that environment as well. Did my first cybersecurity investigation back in '98. I also was involved in implementing a nationwide electronic medical record, which was first kind of project that was ever attempted in that industry to have a nationwide.
Globally.
Yeah, globally.
Yeah.
When we built out our Active Directory back in 2000, it was the 10th largest in all of EMEA.
Wow.
This was back in late 2000, beginning of 2001 is when we completed the implementation. Securing that environment was fairly interesting, especially it's a healthcare environment, so you have other regulations that apply privacy and whatnot, which were just starting to gain traction back in late 90s, early 2000s. The internet was fairly new. There was not as much breaches as we hear about today. Back in 2005, I was offered a job here in Atlanta working for Internet Security Systems. So I moved from Israel out here. Better opportunities for myself, better opportunities for the family. And I worked for Internet Security Systems through their acquisition when they were acquired by IBM. Did some work for IBM, or actually stayed there quite a few years after the acquisition. My last role at IBM was business unit lead for their CSIRT, for their computer security incident response team. And then I went to work for SecureWorks for about a year. Did some interesting work for them. Went and built out the Security Operations Center for one of the big four accounting firms, their internal Security Operations Center. They didn't have it. It was outsourced, brought it in-house. After doing that internally, the consulting arm of that accounting firm asked me to, hey, can you help us do that for our customers? He built out a great Cybersecurity Defense Response Center, is what we called it, not SOC. And I did that for a number of customers. Then I went to work for LinkedIn for a while.
LinkedIn? You mean Microsoft? Before the acquisition?
During. So I received my offer letter about a week or two after the announcement that Microsoft acquired them. And I had the opportunity to interact with folks from Microsoft and see how they transitioned the company over. My team, the team that I led there, did incident monitoring and response, or security monitoring and response. So it was both forensics, incident response, and security monitoring. So the SOC aspect of it, or the network security monitoring, but also the entire life cycle of an incident. From there, I also went to lead a team at one of the, I think they're the 34th largest bank in the country, a commercial bank. I led the team there that did also the same type of thing, monitoring and response, forensics. But being in California was interesting.
What part of California?
Silicon Valley. So
I was born and raised there.
Bay Area.
We're talking about the best places to live. I'd go back and live in the Bay Area. Wouldn't deal with the traffic, but
where in the Bay Area?
Probably, I don't know, Palo Alto, Campbell area.
Not EPA.
No.
Okay. So we lived in Sunnyvale, and then we lived a bit in San Jose.
I was born in San Jose.
Nice, but The folks in California believe that they walk on water, which is...
We do walk on water. We absolutely walk on water. Californians, you grow up next to a body of water. It's like Israelis. Someone who grows up in Tel Aviv walks on water.
I grew up in Netanya, which is close enough to the water. I was in the water 10 minutes after waking up every morning. Still didn't believe that I walked on water.
That's because it's Netanya. Of all the cities in Israel, Netanya has it's like Tel Aviv, and then it's the rest of Israel.
Okay.
You don't think so? There's Tel Aviv and there's the rest of Israel.
I think there's Tel Aviv, there's Haifa. There's both
Jerusalem.
very unique. There's Jerusalem, there's Beersheba. And then there's the rest of the country. But those four cities
Have their own identities.
Have their own identities.
Yeah.
Very different identities. I don't think that I could compare Tel Aviv to Jerusalem, and not just identities, different cultures, different types of people gravitate to those centers. Beersheba, one of the oldest cities in the world.
Do you feel like maybe the Bay Area people feel like they can walk on water? So I heard something really interesting on the flight in here. I was listening to the Charlie Kirk podcast. You know who that is?
Yeah, I know Charlie Kirk.
And he had just posted a podcast, and he was talking about people in California, in the Bay Area. And he was comparing the Bay Area technology revolution to that of what happened in Greece with philosophy or Western democracy goes. When you put a lot of really, really smart people who believe that they can make changes and deliver changes, you get that kind of ego. You get that kind of belief that they're essentially they're a power to be reckoned with.
So one of my biggest challenges with the behavior, that ego that you just described, is here in the Atlanta area. We were talking about Atlanta, and Atlanta has deep history in the security industry. The best and probably the most influential security companies started here in Atlanta. A couple that I mentioned before. Internet Security Systems created the first commercial vulnerability scanner ever here in Atlanta in the late 90s. SecureWorks, world-renowned, known for being one of the best.
Acquired by Dell. Yeah.
But they started here in Atlanta.
Absolutely.
Georgia Tech has produced more security technology than almost any other school in the country, based on their graduates, where they went, what they've done. The companies that were created here in Atlanta have been acquired by other companies. Good example would be StealthWatch, or what used to be called Lancope. They were acquired by Cisco.
Right.
Really advanced technology came out of Atlanta. Mention that in the Bay Area, they'll look at you kind of funny and said, no, innovation only occurs here. And that's an ego problem that I think needs to be overcome.
I think part of it also is that Atlanta doesn't know how to do its own marketing.
Another
I'll be the
challenge.
first to tell you that. Atlanta also doesn't have the same ecosystem that the Bay Area has. When you look at money that's being flowed into, if you and I wanted to start a cybersecurity company here in Atlanta tomorrow, wanted to go raise money, there's only 4 people we can go talk to. We won't name them, but everyone who is from Atlanta who's listening to this podcast knows exactly who we're talking about. It's only 4 people. In the Bay Area,
They're
you've
50.
got 500. Y Combinator, the biggest startup incubator in the world, the best. I mean, it's harder to get in there than it is to get into Harvard.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, those guys have, what is it, like 200 billion. You can't compare that. I mean, I'm not justifying the ego. I'm just saying that if you think of the big security companies where they go and they succeed, it's there.
That's where they get money.
Right, but that's what makes an ecosystem. Part of the ecosystem isn't just talent. It's money supporting that talent.
But on the other hand, or on the flip side, if you will, in order to sustain that talent and maintain that talent and retain the talent in the Bay Area, you need to make sure that they can actually live in the Bay Area. People can live in Atlanta, where, as opposed to the Bay Area, where I was there for a couple of years. One of the most profound things I found out, there are people living in their vans in the Bay Area making 6-figure salaries. That's unheard of in Atlanta. People making six-figure salaries live in mansions in Atlanta. People in the Bay Area making six-figure salaries living in their van.
Is that a personal choice, though?
Not necessarily.
One of my friends from high school lives in the Bay Area, also named James. And he went and he bought a Ford van. Mm-hmm. He turned it into a rolling apartment, and he, drives around the state, and that's what he does. He sleeps in his van. It's a personal choice. It's kind of like a lifestyle for him.
For some people, it probably is. But for others, it's a necessity because
they can't afford rent.
It's outrageous in the Bay Area.
Absolutely.
And that talent is there's an attrition of talent from the Bay Area to places like Texas, for instance.
Right.
Also,
Dallas is huge.
Austin's also just as huge.
Yeah.
And that attrition is a result of the ecosystem.
Some of it's going to Colorado. Some of it's going to Texas. Some of it's going to Salt Lake City. They've built a kind of a very, I like to call it the conservative Silicon Valley. Those companies that have a good moral conscience, that want to go somewhere nice and quiet, that gives them political stability, are going to very funny. They're going to Salt Lake City. I spoke to 5 or 6 different CISOs from major tech companies and said, yeah, our security team is now in Salt Lake City, Utah.
Which is much more affordable.
Correct.
Much more reasonable to live.
Correct.
The weather
Delta Hub.
Delta Hub. The weather there may not be comparable to the Bay Area, but it's not extremely cold.
It's Colorado weather. You get 4 seasons.
Atlanta, we get 4 seasons.
Yeah.
4 of them are summer, and
we get so we have a very long summer. We have 2 weeks of winter. We have 2 weeks of spring, and we've got about a week and a half of fall. If you call that seasons, that's fine. I don't want to get stuck on Atlanta though. I want to kind of, we can debate the whole San Francisco thing, and we'll have a chance to do that with a bunch of other people on September 11th at CyberHub Summit. I think part of that though is kind of want to take you into security operations centers, because I feel like that's I don't want to say it's a hot topic. A lot of CISOs are in the, do I outsource my SOC? Do I in-house my SOC? How do I ensure that I'm building the right SOC? Does my company really need a SOC? Those are questions that a lot of people ask themselves. So how do you answer it?
The best answer that I have is it depends. What are you trying to achieve? What's your end goal? A SOC is a business decision, and the CISO needs to look at it as a business investment. Inevitably, every security system is breached. And I'll explain. Preventative controls are what the industry strived towards in the past, which is great. Having preventative controls are important. However, advanced attackers, advanced adversaries have the ability to circumvent the best preventative controls.
Correct.
Keeping that in mind, inevitably those controls will fail. In order to respond to the failures of those controls, you need at least a team of people to be able to identify when those controls failed, monitoring, respond to the failure of those controls, response, and also identify when you can't see that the controls failed. All those things together indicate that you need some capability within your organization to identify the failures of your security controls. Having a SOC, dedicated SOC, depends on your business culture on one hand, depends on the type of budgeting that you can put towards it, also depends on some regulatory compliance. Each CISO has their own regulatory compliance or lack thereof that they need to contend with. If you're collecting credit card, PCI requires you to have a security operations center, some sort of security operations center. If you're handling patient data, so PHI, protected health information, you are required to monitor the security and the confidentiality of that information and control that confidentiality and security of that information. To that end, you need to have some type of security capability. Now, as we discussed a moment ago, security controls, preventative controls, inevitably fail. What do you do when that happens? If you do not have a security operations center, either outsourced or insourced, how would you know when the security controls fail? And if you are required to report on any failure in the security controls or disclosure of confidential information, if you don't do that, you're subject to other penalties.
So varying on the size of your firm, obviously, right?
Absolutely. And depending on the type of information that you handle and depending on the type of data that goes through your systems. So, like I said, the answer depends. I would say that most organizations would benefit from some type of security operation capability. Whether it's insourced or outsourced depends on the size of the organization,
right?
Depends on the requirements, depends on the hours of operation. A company that is local in, we'll say a small consulting firm in the States that operates traditionally 5 days a week, 9 to 5. They don't need to have a security operations center team. They do need someone to monitor their information if they're collecting information that's valuable. And it's also important to help instill confidence into customers. So if your customers understand that you're taking seriously the information that they are entrusting with you, a way to exhibit that is by showing, here, I have a security operations capability. Doesn't need to be a security operations center, a capability, even if it's one person doing it, or maybe two because you don't want to leave yourself short-handed, that could be sufficient, and some of it may be outsourced to a third party. So it depends.
So there's a lot of different kind of scenarios for a security operations center. Some people are offshoring their security operations centers.
Mm-hmm.
Is that a valid model, you think, for a US based company to offshore its security operations center?
Depends. What type of data are they handling? Because if their data is such that they can offshore it, absolutely, why not? If they're a global company, if they're just a
US based
US based without any subsidiaries, global subsidiaries, it may be cost beneficial for them to outsource their or offshore their security operations.
So this is going to bring us into I like to call it the ultimate debate around security and security operations centers. So obviously, I mean, when you think of, you mentioned SecureWorks earlier, and there's other large companies today that offer you the security operations center as a managed service provider.
Mm-hmm.
And some of them do it very, very well. Some of them don't do it. It's a competitive marketplace. The offshoring of it is becoming more popular from a necessity of what you just said. Depending on the data you're handling, most organizations today handle extremely sensitive data or some part of a data or another where they need to constantly monitor it. Mm-hmm. So you kind of see that happening, but I'm one of those that goes, security is not developing code, a website, or a backend for an app. It's essentially the lifeblood of your organization. And if you're outsourcing it, you're kind of outsourcing it beyond your control. You can't walk into it. You can't audit it just on a Tuesday without announcing.
I understand that concern, and here's my response to that. First and foremost, under no circumstance should any organization completely outsource their security operations. There should always be a person within the organization that has organizational knowledge or institutional knowledge, part of that team. If you outsource most of your security operations, that's fine, because if you have the budget to only have 2 people doing security operations internally, and you want a 24/7 monitoring capability, those 2 people cannot monitor 24/7, 365.
Yeah.
However, completely outsourcing your security operations relinquishes control, as you just stated. You need to have some level of control internally. There are things that internal personnel will inevitably know that your outsourced security operations center or MSSP can't know.
They won't know.
And they won't be able to be on top of everything at every point in time. So you always want to keep at least 1 or 2 people on staff that are your internal security operations, again, depending on the size of your organization. Because if you're a 4-person organization, 2 of them doing security operations may not be sustainable. But if you have a team of 10 folks in your IT team, at least one or two of them should be focused on security.
When's the right time to build a security operations center? Is there a right time? Is there an ideal time for a security operations center for a company being external to internal? Meaning, I may start and hire an MSSP to give me SOC services, but at what point do I say, you know what, I got to bring this in house? Is there a point like that? Is that point data? Is that point size?
I would say that what you would want to start with is devising a defensible architecture.
Uh-huh.
And that defensible architecture should include the ability to collect data related to security type of events. So you have as comprehensive visibility into your organization's activities as you possibly can and collect that data, be it into a SIM or into any other type of collection capability. Once you start down that path, if you don't have a security operations center, don't outsource it, but you have some person in your group of IT people, because inevitably you'll have at least one or two IT folks if you start out small. Looking at that data that's collected on a regular basis, starting gradually, and then based on your growth, you grow your capability. So I'd say that I would start out, if you're a startup, you're beginning of developing your organization, you're a two-person operation, start by collecting the log data that you need. Start by getting someone in there to tell you what you should be collecting data-wise and standing up a capability to collect that data. And there are some fantastic open source free solutions out there that can do that. So first and foremost, get a defensible security architecture, network architecture, and collect the data into a centralized location. And that will help you protect yourself moving forward. Even if you decide that you can run a year or two without any security operations, at least you'll have the data collected and you'll have the capability to start defending yourself when the need arises. So I'd start with first planning for the eventuality that you'll be big enough and you'll have enough data that will need monitoring. Instead of starting with when do I need to do it, start from day one.
Collect your cyber data. And I think that's a really important point is, you know, a lot of organizations today see the need to hire a CISO early. But typically they're hiring someone with the title. They're not really giving them the full-fledged CISO keys per se. And they've got a 2 or 3 or 4 person team. So and they don't have the budget to really go out and do what needs to be done from a security structure. They're always trying to piece stuff together, right? So what are some of the free tools that you were talking about? What can you tell a young CISO that's listening that he can go and grab a few of these free tools that maybe they know or don't know about them? Because, I mean, I'm sure you share them when you were instructing at SANS, but...
Well, when I instruct at SANS, when I mentor for SANS, yeah. So we were talking about Georgia before. Georgia's a great place. We have a lot of really smart security people in Georgia. Not necessarily in Atlanta. There is a gentleman that's in Augusta, Georgia, who created a Linux distro called Security Onion. Security Onion is a Linux distro that has all the network security monitoring tools that you will need. And it also uses the ELK stack or the Elastic stack, which is Elasticsearch, Logstash, and Kibana to collect the data from those monitoring tools. It's a free distro. You can download it. If you are a company that needs actual commercial support, Security Onion Solutions has that support. If you don't have the budget, you don't have the need, there are classes that you can take on the distribution that Doug and his team provides. The distro itself is free to download. Standing it up takes a single box. You can stand it up and start monitoring your network from day one. I've been using it on my home network for the past 10 years. It's an excellent solution. It has all the tools that you can need for monitoring your environment. So it's a network security monitoring capability, which includes a SIM component in there. That's where I would start. And either if you're a CISO, if you're a IT guy that just understands that they need to secure their environment or at least monitor their environment, I would start from there. I would start from other free capabilities. If you're implementing Active Directory, Windows 2012 and above, and Windows 10 as your endpoints, then you can probably use some level of whitelisting to protect your endpoints, which provides a huge amount of benefit. These are all things that you've already paid for. You can say that they're free because they're included with the product. Another capability that Microsoft provides for extensive monitoring, sysinternal tools. There's a tool called Sysmon which enhances the capabilities of your Windows logging. Have all that bundled together with the Security Onion solution and send your logs to that elk stack, and you already have a security operations capability. Wouldn't call it a security operations center because you don't have a team
monitoring,
but you have capabilities that will enable you to develop that team. Now, from my
you've got data. And you've got data points to decide when it's the right time in business to go and either outsource it, spend more money on it, or build it.
Absolutely. Moving that forward a bit, the perspective is this. Your security operations is first and foremost people, processes, and then technology. One of the biggest challenges that I've come across is that there are lots of vendors out there that are promoting lots of new shiny boxes.
Next shiny thing.
The next shiny thing to people who don't understand what they need from a security perspective. Here is my brand new box. Buy this and you'll be secure.
100%. Micah, 100%.
And that doesn't happen. And then at the end of the year, they say, well, we've invested a few $100,000 in these new technologies, and what benefit has it brought? And that's mostly a day after a breach has occurred.
Well, I mean, isn't that the challenge today for CISOs? I mean, you've got so much vendor noise. The conversation is controlled by the next shiny thing. It's deception. You want to know what hackers are going to do in your network. You want to have deception, or it's all these different new tools that people put out there, and most CISOs sometimes forget the basic blocking and tackling that you need in your security program to really just be effective.
There is that. There's a lot of vendor noise, but there's also, what is the objective? What are you trying to achieve here? What's your end state? And I'd say that...
But that differs from organization to organization. That differs from CISO to CISO. Different CISOs have different kind of... And risk plays a huge factor into that.
Absolutely. So what's your risk appetite is what I would ask a CISO.
Right.
What can you tolerate? And do you understand your environment? Or do you have someone who understands the environment? Both the business environment and the technology environment. And those two need to be married together, need to be hand in hand. And an understanding of how each one of them can impact each other is crucially important for a CISO. Having a good understanding of what you want to achieve is a good starting point. But also looking at what's the regulations say regarding your organization. Sometimes the CISO comes into an organization and finds out, I have these 5 different regulations I have to comply with. What do I tackle first? My first recommendation would be, before even tackling any type of regulatory requirement, is look at the CIS, which is the Center of Internet Security, 20 critical
the CIS 20 controls, yeah.
CIS 20 controls is the critical controls for effective cyber defense. Look at those first 5, not 20.
Or 6. We've talked about this before on the podcast. Is if you just take the first 6 CIS controls, you've pretty much got your hygiene and your basic blocking and tackling, and you've got your foundation. You've got a really solid foundation with the first 5 or 6 controls. You say 5. I've had other CISOs on here say 6, but that's semantics at this point.
Well, there's also the Australian Defense Agency.
The Australian Cyber Defense.
Yep.
Yeah.
They came out with their controls, and they have something
Correct.
they call the Essential 8. So I'd go with the Essential 8 or the first 5 or 6 of the critical controls and implement that. And look at that from the perspective of, okay, do I understand all of this information? Am I able to implement those controls? But first, if I can understand these controls and how they apply in my organization, first and foremost, understand how this applies to me. Understand that if you have an organization and you collect data, regardless of what the data is, someone's interested in it. Doesn't matter how small you are, doesn't matter how many people you have, doesn't matter how many customers you have. Eventually, someone will be interested in some piece of data that you will have, and they will find a way in.
That's one way or another.
That's the nature of the beast. That's the nature of the adversaries that we deal with.
Sometimes it's not even data, it's access. Is it not? I mean, I know we always, in cyber, we constantly talk around data. I think a big piece of it is I was at the, last week I was at the Electronic Crime Task Force kind of meetup that the Secret Service did at Microsoft in Avalon. And, the conversation went from data. Data was one part of the conversation. I think the financial fraud was a whole other piece. I think they said 12 billion, FBI says 45 billion, Treasury says 60 billion. I mean, those numbers are astronomical in terms of fraud that's not sustainable for any one company or economy over a long period of time, right? So it's data, it's money, and then it's who can I fool with more money through you?
Absolutely. And there's also the supply chain. So one of the aspects that we need to consider is not what data does my organization have, but who's in my supply chain? Where am I in the supply chain, and how can that impact
upstream and downstream?
Upstream and downstream, exactly. And that's another aspect that we need to be cognizant of. So it's not just about data, it's who do I have access to? Am I an HVAC company that's servicing a
Target,
or am I a payroll processing company that's servicing a security company that's servicing a defense contractor?
Or am I AWS servicing Capital One?
That was Insider. That's a different story.
That's a third-party insider.
This is true.
That is, I think that is a threat that very few people thought of, because when we're in security and you're with other security professionals, whether practitioners in a company side or from a vendor side, we tend to have that blind trust in each other that you're here to help me be safe. And I feel like we're about to see in security what we see in police. 99% of cops are really good people. 1% are assholes. Those 1% make it shitty for every other cop out there. And I think Paige Thompson is that 1% of security people that's about to, I can't say, fudge it up for everyone else. If I say that, if I drop a curse word on here, then we have to mark our podcast as explicit content.
Interesting.
Yes, but that's a threat vector. I mean, that kind of goes to my offshoring thing. How do you know when you're offshoring to a SOC in India, in Poland, in Bulgaria? How do you know that the employees that are operating that SOC are trustworthy? That they're not going to sell you out for a Toyota Corolla?
I had this conversation, actually. Previous employer of mine, the MSSP was proposing, now they were a financial services organization, and the MSSP was proposing a tier 2 SOC operations for them out of Romania, which was an interesting value proposition from a price-wise perspective. However, financial services and Romania don't mix well. Just saying. And we told the MSSP, we're interested in that capability as long as you can do...
As long as it's onshore.
No, it could be offshore, but not Romania. It could be India, for that matter, but not
Why?
Romania. Because Romania has a specific relationship with the financial industry. And one of the
Reputationally, yes, I agree with you. I know exactly what you're talking
I'm
about.
not just reputationally. There are cases, and there have been cases
Absolutely.
where it's
But India's no different. India has the same exact problems.
has problems not necessarily in the financial industries as much as Romania. They're known for issues.
Fraud. India also has a huge fraud issue
Not to the extent
of Romania.
of Romania as it relates to financial institutions specifically. There's also the other perspective that's also important to understand is the optics around it. If I'm an FI, if I'm a financial institution, and I'm offshoring my security to Romania, do I maintain my credibility as securing the financial data of my customers?
How do you explain it to the board?
How do I explain it to the board? How do I explain it to my shareholders? How do I explain it to my customers? Whereas if I outsource it to India, it's easier for me to explain.
Because of the perception of India.
Exactly, from that perspective. On the other hand, if I'm a weapons manufacturer, I can't have China monitoring my my security. That would be a bit.
I don't think you can have any data anywhere near anything that China can get its hands on through its tentacles.
Yeah, there is regulation. There are regulations in place.
Regulation. So having regulation in place is one thing. I find that most regulations like that are in place are in a clause in a contract, but are never checked. As long as someone's willing to sign the contract with that clause, it's like, I don't really care. It's their problem. If something ever happens, I can sue them for it, for breach of contract. But no one's really monitoring it. Do you feel like that's a constant challenge, or are people start to pay more attention to it?
People are paying a bit more attention to it, but your point is valid that it's in a contract. There is a control, but first and foremost, anything that you put in a contract that doesn't have a monetary penalty attached to it, no one actually cares.
But even if you do, it's $1 million monetary penalty. I'm a $55 billion company. Write you that check tomorrow morning.
Maybe, maybe not, but there are other aspects of it.
True.
Some of the controls that are in contracts are confidentiality or non-disclosure agreements. If there were such situations where breach of contract voids the non-disclosure agreement, people think twice because that is their reputation. So say that you're an MSSP and your contract says that you'll do certain things to protect the data. If you put in that contract, our NDA is null and void once if there's a breach of that control. The MSSP will think twice because they don't want it getting out that they didn't secure the data as they were required to. Just as an example. Now, I understand this is fairly harsh, but this is a type of control that can be put in place that will keep people more accountable than just a line in a contract.
So you kind of, I understand what you're saying and all these different controls, and it's a very interesting topic. I think this whole idea of onshoring, offshoring, your security operations center, I think that's a topic that gets credence, but it feels like with security now, you're willing to let the lower hanging fruit get outsourced and focus on the heavier stuff internally and leave more money for that than focus on some of the other stuff. That's at least I'm seeing that in conversations I'm having as a trend. Are you also seeing the same thing?
Yeah, some lower hanging fruit, but there's another aspect. There's something that people need to embrace more, if you will, and that's automation. So I think that a lot of things that people offshore, or not just offshore, outsource, not necessarily offshore, even internally, to what we would consider a tier 1 SOC analyst, 99% of that can be automated. There are certain things that I've seen, based on my experience with this, that we are able to automate and totally not use a MSSP's tier 1 services. So I believe that in the future, tier 1 will probably not be a thing anymore.
I'll agree with that. I don't even been saying that for the last year. I think that automation is going to get rid of the basic analyst role.
And then you have the higher tier analyst, if you will, which requires applying some human intelligence. If a machine can do the work, a machine should do the work, period. Doesn't matter what the work is. If we can automate something that has to do with security, we should automate it. If we're not automating it, we should find a way to automate it. A thing that a machine can't do, that requires human intelligence to be applied, that's where we need our humans. And we need to educate our humans in such a way that they understand the context, they understand the security, the relationships not only between the security and the technology, but how that impacts the business, how that impacts daily life of people that rely on the business, for instance.
So you brought up human intelligence and human capital, and workforce development is obviously a very, I don't want to say big topic. It's a very popular topic. There's not one day that goes by where people don't talk about either a shortage in workforce or not finding the right qualified people for it. You are an instructor and a mentor at SANS.
No, let's call it mentor because I'm not a certified instructor.
Okay, yeah. Or do you plan on being a certified instructor?
We'll see. Not sure.
Not sure. The drama continues. No, so as a mentor at SANS and kind of some of the stuff you do there, are you finding the workforce that's coming into security wanting to go? It seems like it's funny in the Facebook groups and the different kind of cyber groups we're active in as in our community, you find almost everyone wants to be a certified ethical hacker. And that's kind of like, that's where I want to start. Not a lot of people want to go down the forensics route as much. I mean, typically after they do penetration testing, they realize that they're kind of stuck in a role, and then they go and get another cert or another cert. Is certified ethical hacker the right career path in?
That's a difficult question to answer. It depends. What do you want to do, and where are your
You're always answering my questions that way. It's very, very frustrating. Don't depend it.
I don't know. I can't give you an answer that says everyone should be a forensic analyst. The fact that I enjoy doing forensic analysis does not mean that you'll enjoy doing forensic analysis.
Malware. So malware analyst. That's kind of like the. You know what? I'm going to shift this conversation for a second. I want to go to MSSPs again because I remember I had something and I don't have my pen and paper with me, so I couldn't write down my idea. Typically, I get ideas and I write it so I can circle back to it. So I'm going to stop you there. We're going to go back to workforce development. Micah's going to remind me to do that. MSSPs today are a target for hackers. They're getting ransomware attacks that are just crippling organizations. Do MSSPs need their own MSSPs in order to give an MSSP service so they don't get ransomware anymore?
Any organization that handles data should have a security operations component. If you're an MSSP and you're not monitoring your internal environment, the likelihood of you getting breached is higher than anyone else. I would target the MSSP. Best analogy that I have, if I were going to rob a bank, physically go and rob a bank, what would be the first thing that I would do?
Go to the bank.
After getting to the bank, what would be the first thing that I would do?
Go for the money.
Disable the alarms and disable the cameras. Okay. If I disable the MSSP, then I can target whoever I want to target. So if an MSSP is not monitoring their own environment, they're a prime target for attackers that want to attack any of their customers.
So we're seeing this upswing of attacks on MSSPs. I don't know if it's becoming kind of like almost a weekly occurrence. You don't hear about it in the news. Impreva was in the news this week with their kind of their firewall.
I wouldn't consider Impreva being a MSSP, but
they're not. But their firewall service, obviously, their cloud virtual firewall had a vulnerability in it. You're starting to see more and more kind of security products start to get vulnerabilities. Is it we're rushing security products out without really ensuring that these products are properly vetted and tested?
I think there's a shift in the industry where it focuses more on the business rather than the technology and security. So if if I have a product and I have a roadmap and I have a product that has features that are needed in the market, do I wait till the features are fully fleshed out, or am I reliant on timelines that have been provided to the board and provided to my shareholders and say, you need this product to be out by date X with these features that you said that you will put in the roadmap? If that's the direction and you're not validating the security of your product, then this will occur more frequently. If you have a process that says, I control the release date, I as security control the release date of any new product, and until it passes security certification, it's not released, then you reduce the likelihood. I heard this 15 or so years ago from Marianne Davidson, who is the CSO at Oracle. She said that her team, and this was 15 years ago, she said this to us at an ISSA meeting in Israel. She said that her team have the control whether a product's released or not. Her team of hackers hack the tools or hack
their red team.
Their internal red team for their software. Control whether a product's released or not. If we don't do that in security, then we're failing our customers.
But you're starting to see more and more of it. I mean, I'm asking your personal opinion.
My personal opinion is we need to be, in order to maintain our credibility as security companies and security professionals, we need to control when software is released and when it's secure enough to be released. I don't believe in perfect software. That doesn't exist. But I also believe that we can do more due diligence before releasing any software, especially if the software is supposed to provide security capabilities.
So when I was on my trip the last few days, I met with a few people that work for Boeing.
Mm-hmm.
We had a very interesting discussion. Obviously, Boeing's going through the MAX issue that they had with their planes. And in one of our discussions, our conversation, and I'm going to now go back to workforce development.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So who was the largest operator of Boeing 737 MAXs? Do you know?
Wasn't it Delta?
Southwest.
Okay.
Southwest is the airline most affected by the Boeing 737 MAX not being able to fly.
Mm-hmm.
How many times has a Boeing 737 MAX from Southwest crashed? 0.
Mm-hmm.
Where were the 2 airline crashes? Indonesia and Ethiopia. So we were at the hotel in St. Louis. I'm talking to these guys from Boeing's. We're having a drink, and there's a few pilots. Apparently, the hotel that I was staying at was the hotel that most airlines used in the city to house the pilots when they fly in for overnights to get some rest between their flights. So it was actually really nice. I haven't stayed in a hotel that's directly like that in about 2-3 years since I kind of stopped traveling as much. But so we're having this conversation. We're talking to the pilots, and you don't know this, but people who listen to the podcast know I'm an aviation fanatic. That's why I have planes in almost every single one of my shots, on all my sets. I love airplanes. I'm an aviation geek, and this whole 737 thing. So this is going to get me to where I'm trying to go, and I'll make my point real quick. So we started talking about the 2 planes that went down. And the pilot that is certified on the 737 MAX said, yeah, we had the same issues with the plane, and we reported those issues. But don't believe the media when the media says that Boeing didn't pay attention. He goes, we just were trained that if we had this problem, we would turn off all these different controls and take manual control over the airplane and solve the problem. And we never had an issue. So I go, so what you're telling me is that the Indonesian airline and the Ethiopian airline didn't properly train their pilots. And he went, absolutely. He goes, absolutely. He goes, the reason those 2 planes went down was because the pilots weren't properly trained, didn't have the proper, not only training on the airplane itself, but didn't have the proper aviation training in a crisis situation. That kind of takes us back to workforce development. I feel like some cyber incidents are an exact same thing. You can have the best technology, but one human error, take Capital One misconfiguring their S3 bucket, and there it is.
Misconfigurations of S3 bucket is a more common occurrence than people realize. But Capital One hit the news. There are other
30 other companies. Have you seen it?
Mm-hmm.
I've seen the list. They haven't published it. Someone sent me the list yesterday. 30 other companies
that made the list. What about the other 300 that didn't?
No, the 30 other companies is the list that the FBI can confirm. She did the same exact thing that she did to Capital One on. The 300 others she didn't do.
Well, one of the biggest challenges I've seen with S3 buckets is, we'll call this a realization that I came to working at multiple companies. There's a very fine line between an engineer and a hacker or an adversary. And when engineers decide it's easier to work with an S3 bucket if it's world readable, then why not leave it that way? And yeah, it's better to store my API keys in an S3 bucket than on Pastebin, so I'll put them there. But if your S3 bucket is world readable, it's comparable of storing those API keys on Pastebin. And no malicious intent, but no thought through what are the consequences. And that's one of the biggest challenges that we have with our workforce, is there's little realization of what the consequences of actions are, especially for people who don't work in the security industry. IT people, engineers, developers that don't understand what the consequences of certain actions are, develop software like in-purpose software.
So when you talk of security, and you brought up a really good question. We talk about security professionals always in the aspect of an analyst, a malware analyst, a forensics analyst, a malware analyst, a SOC 2, a CISO, a cloud security. I mean, there's so many. We've been working on a project with our friends out of Israel, a company called Outsourcing. Mm-hmm. They're kind of like the certification hub for everything, not just security, but you name it. I mean, that penguin is one of theirs. And I just got sent more swag from them. I got to pick it up over the weekend. They shipped me a bunch more really cool stuff through one of our buddies that we have with those guys. Really cool. They're doing some really cool stuff. But, you see all these. He sent me a list of all the CompTIA certs. We have it somewhere. We write the whole big sheet. There's 2 of them, and they're both front and back. Talk about, Security Plus, Network Plus, you name it. Keep going. SANS has got their own list. EC Council has their own list. ISAC has got their own list. ISC Squared's got their own list. Cert Nexus now. My Lord, is it ever going to stop? I feel confused.
When people stop being able to make money off of it, it'll stop.
Okay, how about the industry just... So... Patrick Benoit has been on our show. Listeners know exactly who he is. So he wrote a really cool white paper on LinkedIn based on one of our conversations. He wrote an article on LinkedIn, and we're going to do a podcast on it really soon. And he comes from aviation. We're going to go back to aviation because I feel like security and aviation are similar in that none of us can do what some people are suggesting, which is get rid of all air travel and travel by train. That's never going to happen.
No, I don't suspect it happening in our lifetime, but you never know. Never say never.
Right. When a train becomes a submarine, let me know. We still have to cross oceans. Easiest way to do it, safest way to do it is by air. If the safest way to cross an ocean was by sea, wouldn't we have better ships today? And it'd be quicker.
I suspect so.
I've been on the fast boats in China. When you're going from like Hong Kong to Macau or from Hong Kong to Guangzhou or mainland China. They have those, I like to call them kind of like the jet ski speedboats that they put you on. Let me tell you something. I've been on a lot of boats in my life. Man. Nah, no. I will fly, and I will continue to fly. And if someone tries to take airplanes away from me, it's like trying to take away my guns. You're gonna have to. It's gonna cause a revolution, in my book. But I take security and aviation because he brought up a very good point, and I'll get to my point, which is what he said. If to fly an airplane with 200 souls on it, you got to have an X amount of experience. You've got to be certified. You've got to be licensed by the government. Why don't we do the same with a CISO?
Excellent question.
Why not have CISA do that? And I'm going to let you answer now. I'm done.
Have CISA meaning the Critical Infrastructure Security Agency?
Certify CISOs.
So there are certifications for CISOs.
Yes, there's CISP and CISO and all of those.
Yeah, the CISO and things. First of all, you need to have an agency that would oversee that, which, you know what, I'm not good with giving the government too much control anyways. So having the government...
But we trust them with our pilots. You trust them.
You might trust them with your pilots. I don't trust the government. I trust the pilots that...
But the government qualifies your pilot. Mm-hmm. The pilot goes to school, finishes school, has to go through an X amount of testing, then has to go through a government test, an FAA test, and the FAA says, okay, you can now fly this class airplane.
How many times have you gone onto a commercial flight where there was a single pilot?
Never.
Exactly. I don't trust a single pilot. I trust there being two pilots. And if one is more qualified than the other or less qualified, at least there's a control there in place that makes me a bit less concerned.
I like that argument. That's a good argument, Jason. You're saying a CISO role shouldn't be one person; it should be two.
Possibly. I'm saying that anytime you have a single person, you have a single point of failure, regardless of who it is. And a single person can always be manipulated. Your other challenge is, who does the CISO need to report to? You're saying they need to be qualified? Why not have the same criteria for a CISO that you have for an attorney, an accountant, and a doctor? It's not just that they need to be certified or trained specifically. They also need to requalify every X number of years. You don't stay an attorney or a accountant if you don't recertify every 3 or 4 years. Same thing regarding doctors. They need to be retrained. And pilots. So the fact that a person can be a CISO today that has been trained 20 years ago and has not received any updated training.
But if you go to the chapter meetings and you hear the vendor pitch that sponsored that chapter meeting with their talk about the new innovative shiny box that you can just buy, then that counts as...
I'm a CISO with a budget, and I know how to buy shiny boxes. I should be a good CISO because I know who to buy the shiny boxes from, and I have a budget. And the CIO, in good case, hired me and he trusts me. That's not a good model. Now, if the person who hired the CISO is not the CIO, rather the CEO or the board of directors, then you have the opportunity there to have more influence on one hand. Besides that, the fact that there is insider threat, the insider threat can come at any level. And if you are bound by a certain level of authority, CIO, COO, CFO, anything below the CEO,
You're layered to doom.
Exactly. And in most organizations, C-level report to the CEO. Why is it that CISO is an outlier?
So I can answer that from a business perspective. Someone who's in business before I was in security.
Mm-hmm.
Because the security role was looked as complementary to IT. See, security was automatically put under IT, and it shouldn't be an IT function. Security should be its own function. Because security isn't just securing your network, your data. It's one of the conversations Mark Hopt and I had on our podcast was we shouldn't have a CISO. It should be a CSO, the Chief Security Officer, and you should be in charge of physical and network and internet and data and financial security. And you can have under you a deputy security and go hire an old cop who retired and you want to have physical security and assessments. You hire a guy and you have him do that. But that should all, physical security and cybersecurity should all roll up under one person. And today in many of the large organizations, they got a physical security officer, chief security officer. They've got a chief information security officer. Now the new thing is a BISO, the business information security officer. Now that's not a C-suite, that's the B-suite. Never heard of the B-suite, but they're now inventing it. And, I'm wondering when the A-suite's going to come. AO.
Interesting model. I'd say that it may be more beneficial to have a security board instead of a chief security officer or chief information security officer.
Have you hung out with CISOs?
I've hung out with CISOs.
Can you imagine a board of them trying to make decisions? Yeah, I rest my case. Because if your answer, if you could have imagined it and it was yes, your answer would have been a swift yes. But it can't be. It's like why you can't have 17 generals overseeing a war. One general oversees a war. There was one MacArthur. One. One Moshe Dayan. One. Not 17, not 5. One. One Ariel Sharon. One.
Mm-hmm.
One James Mattis. Mad Dog. Love the man.
Okay.
One.
Point well taken, but there needs to be some way to make sure that control or that single point of failure is able to either succeed or fail.
So most organizations, most CISOs I speak with, and one of the ways they do that is they build a security committee around the CISO to support the CISO, right? So you have the CIO on there maybe, and the general counsel, and you've got maybe someone from finance, from procurement, you've got someone from marketing, and you kind of got this council that's
so
supporting.
We're back to the counselor
security.
to the board, as I mentioned before. I didn't say that the board needs to be everyone's equal on it. You implied that. You have a security council. The CISO is the head or the chair of the council, but there is a council and there is a debate. There isn't a single person that controls it.
Correct, but at the end of the day, the CISO is the one that has to he's the one that takes the liability for a decision made.
He does, and he is the chair,
and
he's the tiebreaker vote. But it needs to be it needs to be by committee. The CISO brings it to the committee, brings his arguments, or anyone else in the committee brings their arguments. CISO is there for a very specific role. They're the chair. You said you only have one general for a war, but you do have the Joint Chiefs of Staff.
Correct.
They have a chairman.
They do.
But they're all chiefs of staff.
Correct.
So
the president has you look at the president's one-man control, but he's got the defense minister, the Joint Chiefs, the Homeland Security. He's got he's got his secretaries, he's got his council to. Everyone gives an opinion, but he takes the responsibility. I think having a council where everyone's vote matters and weighs the same is different.
Matters, but not necessarily equal. Like I said, the CISO is the decider at the end of the day, or the...
We should make an electoral college system for cybersecurity decisions. I think the Democrats would love that idea. It's my sarcastic note of the day.
See, you want to be political on the record. I don't.
I don't mind. People know my politics on this record. If they listen to our other Goodbye Privacy podcast, I'm very, very clear on some of the stuff I want the government to be more involved in, and other stuff where I don't want them even touching it. I think government should stay out of technology altogether.
Would you consider, sorry to interrupt, security the same as technology? Shouldn't the government defend its country?
I think the government should defend its infrastructure. I don't think it should defend a company.
But our infrastructure is controlled by companies.
That's the challenge in our system, but that's what CISA was done by Homeland Security. CISA was designed to be a security enabler for organizations to defend our most critical infrastructure, whether it be internet, phone, water, financial institutions. healthcare. Some of those have to
Elections.
There's all that. That's their role. That's what CISA was created for. Well, they were the NPPPD, DPD, PBD. They had a really, really weird name before they became CISA. And by the way, they became CISA partially because of the lobbying of the NTSC, based out of Atlanta.
Of course, based out of it.
But the NTSC pushed very hard to get a bill passed to rename them so that they can actually, their name will actually say what they do, which is Cyber Infrastructure Security Agency under Homeland.
Critical Infrastructure Security Agency, not cyber.
Is it critical? Yeah, it might be. Yeah, you're right. I saw a CISA guy at the airport today, so I don't know why it says cyber.
CISA, you mean Certified Information System
No. CISA, Homeland Security, man. See, that's the problem. There's way too many cyber certifications. I can say CISA, and you might think certification. He might think Homeland Security, and some guy might think I got a lisp.
You might have a list.
Yeah.
Just not right. I think that it's important for the government is supposed to provide the protections. CISA does not provide the protections.
CISA provides the guidelines.
Guidelines are great.
They provide the incident response.
So the government provides the guidelines of how our military will act, but they also provide the military to take action. They provide CISA to provide guidelines.
Let me put it to you like
we're done. Our infrastructure is secure.
I'm not saying our infrastructure is secure, but here's what I'm saying. The difference between here and, let's say, Israel, right? You and I both lived in Israel. So cyber in Israel is a lot different than here. Yes or no? You got a really smart ass smirk on your face. So can you just either agree or disagree with me right off the bat?
Cyber is absolutely everything's different in Israel. Cyber is no different than everything else.
The Israeli Electric Company used to be a government company, then it went private.
It's still it's government
semi-government, but it still has private stakeholders.
So does a phone company in Israel.
Private stakeholders, but same thing here. AT&T, Bell South, they got started as private enterprises that got government support for their idea. They took a lot of government money. There weren't venture capitalists when Alexander Graham Bell invented the phone.
No, that didn't exist yet. And the American Telephone and Telegraph Company that was founded by Alexander Graham Bell back in the 1800s got government support and was a monopoly up until 1982 when it was divested and broken out into the regional Bell companies. So Bell South, Southwestern Bell, Mid-Atlantic Bell, Pacific Bell, those were all initially or originally part of AT&T before they were divested. So the government decided that a monopoly is not good and they broke them up. And that's where the government that's one of the government's roles, absolutely. But today, the government has regulations around communications, around telephone, but they don't enforce, they have controls, but they don't have the personnel or the power to enforce the guidelines. And CISA is no different. The agency itself doesn't have people, they're part of Homeland. What else is part of Homeland?
ICE.
FBI.
I think is FBI part of Homeland Security?
I couldn't answer that.
Regardless,
ICE. I think FBI is an executive branch, and CISA is not. CISA is an agency. Homeland Security is an agency. Homeland Security is like DoD. It's FBI isn't under Homeland. FBI is
under Justice. You're right.
Is under Justice.
Okay, you're right. But Homeland has Homeland Security agents.
Correct. It's got ICE.
It's got ICE. It's got people
TSA.
TSA. It has people to enforce its regulations.
Correct. But they're building the cyber workforce within CISA to enforce their cyber regulations.
CISA doesn't have agents to enforce.
Yet. That's in the plan. Chris Krebs has been talking about that.
And until they have agents to
But they have incident response teams now all over the country.
Okay.
But that's one way to start. We don't call the cops. We go, hey, I think I'm about to get robbed. You call the cops when you get robbed. and you want the cops to respond. And right now, we're not calling CISA because CISA isn't going to come and secure your entire company by saying, I've got the magic pill that's going to make sure you don't get hacked. They do that through information sharing, through threat intelligence. They do that with the different ISACs. They have a lot of different. They do very good activity to try to get you information. Part of it, though, is some businesses don't trust government, and I don't blame them. I'm not saying go trust CISA.
Well, I'm going back to Micah's point there, which was, shouldn't the government secure these things? That's the point that I was getting at. And CISA is not in a position to secure these things. They're in a position to provide guidelines with some ability to enforce it or some penalties if these guidelines are not enforced. But they don't have the ability to enforce it.
You don't have an agency. So technically today, there's no agency that can enforce cyber regulations because the laws in Congress don't allow that to happen. That's one of the arguments the NTSC is trying to make with the new federal privacy bill and the federal data notification breach bill. And the idea there is either give it to an existing agency like the Federal Trade Commission and have the FTC oversee it, and then the FTC has investigative power. They've also got the power to fine you and enforce it, right? Or create a new agency to just take care of cyber. And I'm not for creating any more government agencies. I think we have way too many to begin with. So let's bring it all down and let's find an agency that's existing within the government that has no use because they used to watch something and now that doesn't even matter anymore, right? Because we don't do it anymore. Let's get rid of the Social Security Administration. It's going to be defunded anyways in 20 years. There's going to be no money there.
I hope that's not true, but...
No, it's absolutely true, though. Look at the books. The ledgers don't lie. There's going to be no money for... By the time I retire and Micah retires and you retire, we won't have Social Security. We won't.
I'm much closer to retirement than you are, but...
You might get some of it. Micah and I are fucked. Sorry, Apple. We're now explicit. All right? But we're fucked. We're not going to have Social Security at all. So I have an idea. You know how we get Social Security back so that we have Social Security? Have Social Security Administration administer cyber fines.
Sounds like an awesome idea.
I bet you there's someone in the Democratic Party listening to this right now going, brilliant. Hey, AOC, my idea. Don't take it. All right?
There's probably someone in the NSA listening to this, which concerns me more.
Well, we have to wrap up. We are out of time, according to Micah. So I'll have you back on. We're going to schedule again after CyberHub Summit. We also got to do an episode in Hebrew.
We absolutely do.
Yes. So
James, thank you for having me. I really appreciate the opportunity.
This was so much fun.
This is fun.
Yeah, this was an awesome podcast. Thanks for coming in and sharing. And I wanted to get deeper, but we didn't. We ended up being a bit more shallow. But next time we'll do something very, very specific, very, very deep around incident response.
We didn't even talk about workforce development. We went on a tangent.
We went on a tangent. Yes, we did. We went on a tangent. We did.
It's a very dark tangent.
It was. It's a very dark one. You listen. People that listen to the show understand my opinions, and very much. It's part of hosting this show is being able to have a point of view and bring people on to discuss it openly. And we don't have to agree, but we can obviously discuss it.
Absolutely.
That's the point of this country, allowing conversations to be had.
Shh! Don't tell the Democrats.
That's hate speech.
That is hate speech at this point, yeah. I hope someone listens and hashtags this podcast. Do you realize how many more listeners we would get? Jeez, we might get a bunch of sponsors. If you want to sponsor our show, please reach out to us. CyberHubEngage.com. Jason, thanks for being here. Thanks for listening. Thanks for tuning in. More next week with another great episode of the CyberHub Engage podcast. Make sure you subscribe, give us 5 stars, and comment. And we are getting ready for October and National Cybersecurity Awareness Month, which is only now a month away. Thanks for tuning in.